Hare Krishna. This morning we are reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 2, Chapter 10. This chapter is titled, Bhagavatam is the answer to all questions. And we'll be reading verse number 27. Before we read, we recite the invocation. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So, Canto 2, Chapter 10, Text 27. Utshishkshodhatu malam nirabhidyatavai godam tatapayustato mitra Utsarga ubayashrayah Uchishikshodhatu malam Nirabhidyatavai godam Tatapayu tato mitra Utsarga ubayashrayah Uchishikshodhatu malam Nirabhidyatavai godam Tatapayustato mitra Utsarga ubayashrayah Uchishiksho, desiring to evacuate. Dhatu malam, refuse of eatables. Nirabhidyata, became open. Why? Certainly. Gudam, the evacuating hole. Tata, thereafter. Payu, the evacuating sense organ. Tata, thereafter. Mitra, the controlling demigod. Utsargaha, the substance evacuated. Ubhaya, both. Ashrayaha, shelter. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace Srila Abhay Charana Bhakti Vedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Translation. Thereafter, when he desired to evacuate the refuse of eatables, the evacuating hole, anus, and the sensory organ thereof developed along with the controlling deity Mitra. The sensory organ and the evacuating substance are both under the shelter of the controlling deity. Purport. Even in the matter of evacuating stool, the refuse is controlled. So how can the living entity claim to be independent? So this is the short purport, just one line. So I'll read through the next verse and purport. Text 28. Ashishupsho pura purya navidvaram apanataha tatrapana tato mrityu pritaktvam ubayashrayam. Thereafter, when he desired to move from one body to another, the navel and the air of departure and death were combinedly created. The navel is the shelter for both, namely death and the separating force. Purport. The pranavayu continues the life, and the apanavayu stops the living force. Both the vibrations are generated from the abdominal hole, the navel. This navel is the joint from one body to the other. Lord Brahma was born of the abdominal hole of Garbhodakashayi Vishnu as a separate body. And the same principle is followed even in the birth of any ordinary body. The body of the child develops from the body of the mother. And when the child is separated from the body of the mother, it is separated by cutting the navel joint. And that is the way the Supreme Lord manifested himself as separated many. The living entities are therefore separated parts, and thus they have no independence. Om Ajnanatimirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manovishtam Stapikam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadavayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yutapada Kamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathanvitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Pada Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakanvitam Cha E Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dina Bandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Rishabhanu Shute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vancha Kalpatirubhascha Kripa Sindhu Bhaivacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namah Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna. So I'll just quickly read the translation for these two verses that I read. Thereafter, verse 27, thereafter, when he desired to evacuate the refuse of eatables, the evacuating hole, anus, and the sensory organ thereof, developed along with the controlling deity Mitra. The sensory organ and the evacuating substance are both under the shelter of the controlling deity. Thereafter, verse 28, thereafter, when he desired to move from one body to another, the navel and the air of departure and death were combinedly created. The navel is the shelter for both, namely death and the separating force. So, these two verses here, actually very, very short verse. I mean, the purport was very short, especially verse 27, it's just one line. But it's so powerful because it's shaking us up. It is waking us up to reality. And what is reality? In the context of the Bhagavatam, and I came across this definition of reality, or you say absolute reality or the highest reality or the highest truth. When I first had gotten my copy of Bhagavatam 1.1, and in that, I think verse number 3 or 4, the highest truth is reality distinguished from illusion for the welfare of all. It's verse number 3, right? Or 4? The first canto, chapter 1, and I believe it's verse 3 or 4, in which it describes what is the Bhagavatam. And it's basically, it's a long translation, but in that there's this embedded gem. Obviously, the whole of Bhagavatam is filled with gems, but there's statement just to the highest truth is reality, distinguished from illusion for the welfare of all. So Bhagavatam is waking us up to this reality that, knock knock, you are not independent. You are dependent on, and we quite often we are confronted, we feel exposed to this fact over and over again. Because like today as I'm speaking, we are all having to comply with the health orders, which is to wear a mask. And to be honest, wearing a mask and and doing certain functions can be a bit disorienting, because we are not used to this. We are free souls. We would like to do whatever we like to do, but because given the current circumstances, we are having to comply with this request, and at times this can just be a bit difficult to comply with, because it's, as I'm speaking, I'm having to breathe in, breathe out, and we feel that it's obstructing our movements. So, but we are, from time and time again, this world tells us that we are not independent, we are dependent. So, at the moment, we are dependent on the health restrictions. And if not so, if we just broaden that horizon a bit more, we see we are dependent on so many things. For example, at this current moment, we are faced with this pandemic. And it's so amazing to see that, not amazing, but if you just analyze it, I think just a few weeks ago, His Holiness Devamrita Swami was speaking to devotees in Australia and New Zealand, and he was addressing them on behalf of the Live to Give campaign, which is a book distribution campaign that has set a goal to distribute a certain number of books, I believe from December 7th to Jan 7th, and he was saying that all of the world's major economies and countries and so on and so forth have come to a standstill just due to this invisible microbe. We can't see it with our naked eyes, but it's causing so much of upheaval in the world today that, I remember a few months ago or some time ago, I was speaking to a friend of mine, and we were discussing, we were basically having a discussion which was a comparison between the first world, what we call the first world countries and the third world countries, and how in the first world countries there are better resources, there are the resources are in abundance, people are more skilled, there's less crime, and that there can be many other reasons outlined that spring in favor of the first world countries and why it's more beneficial to live there. But as the situation stands in the world today, majority of the first world countries are suffering more than what you would say the third world or the lower advantaged countries in terms of this pandemic. People are there is a shortage of medical resources, and as we see all that the governments, the best that they're trying to do is just say we have no idea or what's coming at us. There is a rush right now for a vaccine to come in to the markets, which will help mitigate some of the effects of this pandemic. But yet, there is no 100% assurance that this will actually mitigate what we are facing. So, time and time again, we are faced with situations in this world, in our own lives, that expose this mentality of us. And what's this mentality? The mentality of lording it over material nature. And actually, you'll only see this quite often it strikes, it's basically these striking statements that are stated in Srila Prabhupada's purports, in the Bhagavatam, in Gita, that we have this mentality of lording over material nature. We have this exploitative mentality which causes us to be in this material world, birth after birth. So therefore Bhagavatam comes to us and presents us reality. What's that reality? That Jivera Swarupa Krishnera Nityadas, that we are eternally the servants of Krishna. And we reside in the spiritual realm. And our constitutional position is to serve Krishna and his associates. So, coming back to this verse and the following verse, 27 and 28, and it's quite interesting to see, even in the matter of evacuating stool, the refuse is controlled. And then I was reading it, I was like, oh yeah, because what would happen if everything I ate came out? That would mean that I wouldn't have any energy in the body because it's just going in and coming out. But you clearly see that there is a mechanism here which is controlling what stays in the body and what gets rejected. And it clearly says that we don't control it. So that means that there is some controller. And in the preceding verses, I believe it started off from verse 17, and it goes on to verse 31, where this aspect of the three words that are mentioned here is Adi Bhuta, Adi Daiva, and Adi Atma. So it goes on to say that the first is the Lord's desire. Only when the Lord desires to see, we see. So our only independence is that we independently desire, and I think it's mentioned in verse, in verse number 20, it says, the idea is that the living entity cannot do anything independently. He can simply think of doing something independently, but he cannot act independently. The independence in thinking is there by the grace of the Lord, but the thinking can be given shape by the grace of the Lord. And therefore the common saying is that the man proposes and God disposes. The whole explanation is on the subject of absolute dependence of living entities and absolute independence of the Supreme Lord. So we have that independence, because we are part and parcel of Krishna, we have that minute independence. But we cannot independently act, because that act is actually, that is given shape by the Lord. So, first comes when the Lord desires, the organ is generated, which is known as the Adi Bhuta. And as the organ is generated, there comes a controlling demigod, Adi Daiva, that resides in there, that controls the movements. And because there is what you call the form of matter, which is Adi Bhuta, there's a controlling demigod, Adi Daiva. Through that we perceive Adi Atma, basically. So there's this mouth. In this mouth there resides the demigod who controls, movements of the mouth. And through the mouth we basically can relish, in the mouth resides the tongue through which we can relish different foodstuffs. So that the perception of tasting and hearing, of tasting and speaking happens. And quite interestingly, in the following verse, in 28, it speaks about the air. And I know maybe we've discussed it in the past, but actually there's a very detailed purport on the different kinds of air in the body that's in Bhagavatam Canto 3, verse number 6. Bhagavatam Canto 3, chapter 6, verse 10. And it talks about the different kinds of air, which I'll just go through here. It wouldn't take that long. And it speaks about prana, air that passes through the nose, which helps us breathe. There's apana. So when I say prana, it's pranavayu, apanavayu, samanavayu. So pranavayu, as we said, is the air that passes through the nose, which helps us breathe. Apanavayu, which passes through the rectum, which helps us evacuate bodily air. Samanavayu is the air that passes through the stomach, which adjusts food that we've eaten. Or else we take it for granted that whatever we eat gets digested, but actually that's happening through this air that's passing through the stomach. There's Udanavayu, the air that passes through the throat. And if it stops, we will suffocate. There's Vyanavayu, that's the total air that circulates through the entire body. There's Nagavayu, the air that passes through the eyes, which helps us open our eyes, open our mouth. There's Krikaravayu, which increases appetite. There's Kurmavayu, which helps with contraction. There's Devadattavayu, which goes in and out through the mouth, which helps us yawn. And then there's Dhananjanavayu, which helps with sustenance. So you see these intricate details here, which tells us, which gives us this information that and this basically comes back to the point that we want to be the doers. And Krishna beautifully describes this in the Bhagavad Gita, chapter 3. Prakrite kriyamanani guna karmani sarvashaha ahankara vimudatma kartaham iti vanyate. The spirit soul bewildered by the modes of nature thinks himself to be the doer, but in actuality, they're carried out by the material nature. So we are not the only doers. There are many factors that make something that constitute the successful action of, successful execution of an action. So similarly here we see that there's just something as basic as me just moving my hand. It's just not me moving my hand. There's first that desire to move my hand, and then there is this particular bodily function that enables it, but most importantly, there's a controlling demigod that allows for this to happen. I was reading in one of the Back to Godhead magazines, Srila Prabhupada Bhagavatam lecture from San Francisco, February 17, 1967, in which he describes that how everything is so perfect and complete in Krishna's creation. And that echoes the first verse of the Ishopanishad, Om Purnam Idam Purnam Idam. So everything is perfect and complete. And he said, look at us. We need water for our sustenance. And this earth is filled with, three-fourth of this earth is filled with water. And the water is salty. Why? If it's not salty, it'll decompose. So how this whole process happens, Srila Prabhupada describes that the water is collected by the clouds and the evaporation happens in the sky and the salt is taken off, and then the cloud disperses the waters, which basically then reside on the summit of the mountain, which comes down through the forces of gravity. So Srila Prabhupada makes a statement that when there's a scarcity of water, we simply look at the sky. Because we can't do anything else. So we depend on this whole intricate mechanism that's created by Krishna. If there is, I remember last year, unfortunately we were going through a very severe crisis here, bushfires, and there wasn't much rainfall. And the absence of that, the government just was saying, what do we do? There were restrictions being placed on how much of water you can use in your homes because, as we understand, rainfall is produced by yajna, sacrifice. And in Kali Yuga, generally people aren't very favorable towards executing sacrifice. So that's why in this age of Kali Yuga, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu comes to give us the Sankirtan Yajna. By this yajna, everything becomes perfect. So, Srila Prabhupada in that lecture was clearly saying that there is plenty of resources that are provided to us by Krishna, but it's due to our mismanagement that we see a scarcity of resources in this world, and that's what causes us to suffer. I was listening to a lecture yesterday by His grace, Prana Prabhu on this verse, and he was echoing some very beautiful points made by His Holiness Devamrita Swami. Maharaj was saying that how the advancement of civilization is actually can be understood by complete dependence on the Lord. And he was echoing Queen Kunti's prayers from Canto 1, Chapter 8. And in that she beautifully describes the state of her heart when the war has just finished and Krishna is leaving to go back to Dwarka. And she says there that, now when we're faced with these calamities, you were there with us, and now you're leaving us. And she's requesting Krishna to please stay back, because she feels the absence of Krishna would actually be more devastating than the calamities that they were having to go through. And in that, beautifully, if you look at Canto 1, Chapter 8, verse number 40, I'll just read that here. All these cities and villages are flourishing in all respects because the herbs and grains are in abundance. The trees are full of fruits, the rivers are flowing, the hills are full of minerals, and the oceans full of wealth. And this is all due to your glancing over them. And in the purport, Srila Prabhupada, beautiful, right? Human prosperity flourishes by natural gifts and not by gigantic industrial enterprises. And towards the end he writes, but all of these natural gifts are dependent on the mercy of the Lord. What we need, therefore, is to be obedient to the laws of the Lord and achieve the perfection of human life by devotional service. The indications by Kunti Devi are just to the point. She desires that God's mercy be bestowed upon them so that natural prosperity be maintained by His grace. So time and time again, this point comes, this point is emphasized in the Bhagavatam and in different books, the prayers of the Acharyas too, that how we should lead our lives by living to this principle of dependence on the Lord. And when that happens, that's, as Maharaj was describing, that's the advancement of the civilization. So with this pandemic, and a lot of times we feel that even in our own practice of Krishna consciousness or giving of Krishna consciousness, we feel that in situations like these, a lot of it gets hampered. And as I was just meditating on this point that, for example, book distribution, given the situation we are in, we feel handicapped because we can't go out, we can't really openly speak to people because of all these restrictions. You never know if someone will be favorable or not favorable depending on, what are they going through, but most importantly, will they trust you to even get a book from you? But you actually see book distribution is actually, or books, or literature that's glorifying Krishna is actually transcendental. It has nothing to do with the external circumstances. If you really, I think tomorrow is the cutoff date, 6th or 7th, and next week the results will be announced. And overwhelmingly, I guess Ganeshan Prabhu can speak more about it, but the little that I've been following, overwhelmingly, all of the centers, or majority of the centers, have actually smashed their records. It's sort of paradoxical because we can't go out, but the book distribution is increasing. How is that happening? And I remember Ganeshan Prabhu telling me, I think some time ago, that even he was speaking to Maharaj, or there was some conversation that happened that even during the Vietnam War in the 70s, America was actually in a recession. They had spent a lot of their budget on defense, and it was actually economically one of the worst periods in American history. But you see from that point, if you just look at that phase in American history, Srila Prabhupada's book distribution was not hampered at all. People were keen on getting books. They were wanting to read more. They were wanting to really understand what is the purpose of my life. And even a few years ago, I was having a conversation with this one devotee who was telling me that, oh, Prabhu, we should, I think this whole concept of physical books is no longer applicable because people are always on their tablets, on their phones. We should rather go for other forms of outreach because, no one has the time now to even open a book and read a book. Yet we see that being that very, now obviously from the physical or from the mundane perspective that may be true because people don't have the time to read a book. But when you really see these statistics, which obviously statistics is what gives shape to the conclusions that we reach to, you see that book distribution is actually increasing. And as when we see from a mundane perspective, it doesn't make sense. But again, we see it from the transcendental perspective, it's not dependent on the external circumstances. So many people are out there, and I think as every day or on a very regular basis, we get the updates from the Happy Jiva team of all the amazing experiences they're having with people who are wanting to read Srila Prabhupada's books and make their lives successful. So time and time again we depend on Krishna, and the more we do so, the more we'll feel, more we experience Krishna's reciprocation, which is the purpose of our lives. And if you really see the lives of our acharyas, also Srila Prabhupada, that they exemplify this principle. I've been reading, I just started reading Chaitanya Charitamrita Madhya Leela, and in that, Sri Rupa and Sanatana Goswami are coming to see the Lord in Ram Kelly. Yeah, in Ram Kelly, they both come to see him. And after just a brief, just introduction, they say these beautiful prayers, and they basically are just speaking their heart, which is filled with dainya, humility. They say, we are from such low-born culture because they've been associating, and in one sense, they basically say that Jagai and Madai, we are more fortunate. And they say that we are much less qualified than Jagai and Madai, because Jagai and Madai were born in a Brahminical, they had a Brahminical background, but they never, and if I remember it correctly, maybe you can help me, Yeshwar Prabhu, they say that they never became the instruments of sinful activity. In other words, they were saying because we work for the Muslim ruler, we are having to be instruments of so many things which are actually not Brahminical, which are actually sinful. So they're condemning their own position, and in one sense they're glorifying Jagai and Madai as opposed to themselves. So true humility comes when we depend on the Lord, when we find ourselves to be in a position where we would want to, where we feel that the only recourse, that the only our only means of achieving perfection is the mercy of the Lord. Obviously, that doesn't mean I just sit and do nothing, but I do whatever I can do in my capacity, but I depend on the mercy of the Lord, and that's the ashraya, that's the shelter that the Bhagavatam is asking us to take. Just for the last few days, I believe from Feb 2nd, there's this beautiful Govardhan retreat happening in Govardhan. I mean, it's virtual at the moment, so if His Grace Bhuijan Prabhu, His Holiness Sachinandan Swami, His Grace Madhavananda Prabhu, Grace Mother Jagatarini are speaking on different topics from the Krishna Leela. And His Holiness Sachinandan Swami is speaking on life lessons from the Govardhan Leela, and he says that Krishna, by his own example, he's teaching the Vrajavasis, who should we take shelter of? And that's Giriraj. So similarly, for us, we take shelter of Shri Radha Gopinath, Shri Gaur Nitai, Shri Jagannath Baldev Subhadra, Shri Prabhupada, Acharyas. They are our true shelter. And that's whom we go to whenever, at all times and in all circumstances. So I'd like to end here if there's any question or comment. How can we relish our dependence on Krishna while we still have that, we could still have that mentality of being independent? Some practical ways. Well, I'm just going through some of, just some personal realizations and what I've been hearing from different devotees. How do you relish? Well, I'll try to say something that was spoken by Srila Prabhupada, but obviously that's not, maybe that we can take that as a context, and I'll try to blend that in with something that I've had. So Srila Prabhupada was once asked, I think after, so we all know that he went to New York, and the first year and a half he was practically alone. Like there's not much information whatever we see in the Lila Amrita we find, but there's a lot of information that we still don't have access to because there was no one there to document what happened in those first 1.5 years. And actually, one time I remember I'm not sure I read it somewhere, but I heard someone say, this was just some third person saying, and that they were maybe saying, they had heard it from, I think Satsvarup Maharaj, but someone who was there. This very, very early days, that Srila Prabhupada was with at that time, some newcomers sitting in a room. And Srila Prabhupada, I think there was a banana laying there, and Prabhupada just ate the banana. And then the person said that something to the extent that the person asked, and then Prabhupada said, because I'm old, I need to eat, something to the extent. But later on it came to be known that Srila Prabhupada hadn't eaten in 2.5 days. And there was many such instances like these that we don't even know exactly what had actually happened. Later on, when they asked Srila Prabhupada about those early days, and he said that those first, and they were saying that it must have been so difficult for you to, go through. Like those first year and a half, I'm just paraphrasing, were actually the most blissful years of my service to my Guru Maharaj, because I felt a very, very close and intimate connection with my Guru Maharaj, because I was doing, I was doing whatever were the instructions of my Guru Maharaj, and I felt a great sense of ecstasy. Now, on the mundane level, this is actually very painful, but he was feeling that ecstasy. So for us, I think there is a verse somewhere in the Bhagavatam, and I can't remember that, or maybe Prabhupada said that the more we struggle, or something, the Lord is pleased by our struggle, because that struggle is for us to achieve the grace of the Lord. So, in my instance, what I've experienced, a little, however that may count, but a lot of times when I've been through certain phases, experiences which could be summed up as, difficult phases. Now when I look back, I understand, there were actually this was actually Krishna's gift for me, because had I not been in that situation, I would have not learned to appreciate what I have now. How can we relish personally is what helped me a lot, was to just somehow or the other appreciate being in the presence of devotees, always having good association or good guidance that helped me understand that whatever situation or whatever realizations I may be having at that moment, how to deepen my own Krishna consciousness was, I would say personally, it would help me a lot, was having good association. Because a lot of times we see that, I think Bhanshambar was mentioning that in, I think, one of his first Happy Jiva classes, that a lot of times we discount this very fact of experience, because in my lifetime, I'm going to live for 30 or 70 or whatever years. If I have access to someone who's lived through this, and who can, who have faith and who I can trust, will tell me, by my experience, this what you're going through is actually going to prepare you for something even greater, or this. So rather than me relying on my own intuition and discriminating based on what I understand, having that experience having access to that experience through some senior association or senior guidance helps a lot. And once I'd heard this in a Bhagavatam class too, that if you have good mature guidance, then in the form of a senior experienced devotee, then that's Krishna's blessing upon you, and that'll help us relish. But I would say relish it'll help us appreciate the gifts of what we have. For example, a lot of times now that I'm in America and I'm physically separated from my Guru Maharaj, because he was there, but there were times where I would have so much of opportunity to serve him personally. And a lot of times when you serve your spiritual master personally, you get a lot of instructions in the form of chastisement. And at times like, oh my God, what am I doing? I'm not doing it right. Maybe how can I improve my service? But now I see that how that chastisement helped me to some. I still need to learn. I still need to truly imbibe the service attitude of what was being imparted to me. But I could see how that chastisement helped me, or else I would have just been on my own. It would have been me and my mind which would have made me do things which the spiritual master was helping correct. Thank you, bro. Yeah, go ahead. Yes. Yeah. Mm. Thank you, bro. Granth Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Prabhupada ki jai. Thank you, Premanand.